Hi everyone, and welcome to this video. So this week we're going to look at DeepSeek L1 model and actually assess its capabilities by looking at two examples that leverage its multilingual and agentic RAG capabilities. So today we're going to look at two different examples. The first one is going to be a marketing multilingual generator. So this specific example generates marketing campaigns for specific countries and use the superior multilingual capabilities of DeepSeek L1 and its capacity to change the tone and the style depending on the target audience and culture to generate like very good marketing campaigns. So we'll take a look at this one first. The second example is going to be an agentic RAG that's going to help us to answer questions on top of all the last papers published, even the one that were published yesterday or today. And for that, we're going to leverage the reasoning capabilities and some kind of like tool calling with DeepSeek L1, and also demonstrate that I can ask questions in French over like English results and still get pretty accurate French answers. So in today's video, we're going to use, of course, ingest to do all the workflow orchestration, and especially the AI features that we launched that enables you to get visualization of the different like LLM calls that have been performed. There we'll see that we can see the number of tokens, we can look at the input and the output of the LLM calls, which is pretty handy. The model we're going to use, which is DeepSeek R1 Queen 32B, is going to be an instance deployed on Koyeb. And Koyeb enables us to deploy this model pretty quickly, to use it and to pay by usage. So to give you an idea, it's pretty cheap to actually play with this new model with Koyeb because you end up only paying like $2 per hour. So let's now jump into the code. So this one is using a feature that DeepSeek R1 excels at, which is adapting its generated text to a particular language or culture by changing the tone and the style depending on the audience. So we're going to test this capability by using this generator, which is the AI workflow using prompt chaining principle. So what we're going to do first is look at our workflow. So for those not familiar with ingest, you can define everything using ingest.create function, and this is how you create a workflow. Then the workflow is going to be triggered by an event. Here it's going to be this event, and the event is going to carry some data. The data is going to be the input of our workflow. This particular marketing workflow is going to take three important information. The first one is brand info. So here, let's say it's going to be a description of ingest. Then the target languages, which are going to be the target markets. Let's say we're going to try Germany, France, and UK. And the campaign goal, let's say we want to target CTOs and architects working on B2B AI product. We'll see later that we also added this optional parameter that is the model. By default, it's DeepSeek, but we're going to use it to actually use OpenAI R1 and be able to compare different results. Here we have a client, an OpenAI client. So the good thing with deploying DeepSeek R1 to Koyeb is that you get like an OpenAI API compliant interface. So you can use the OpenAI client to actually play with DeepSeek, but also to play with OpenAI R1. And so we get this kind of generic, depending on the type of model we selected in the event data clients that we're going to use. And here we have the first step. So like I said, it's going to be a prompt chaining. So we're going to have a first prompt that's going to generate something that we're going to reuse in other prompts to make them more precise. So the first prompt, of course, is something that's going to be a basis to actually generate campaigns in each language. So what we want is to generate the core message and the key theme. So here we're going to say, hey, we have the brand info, we have the campaign goal. So a first thing to say here, you might find something that is very specific or weird in this prompt. First, we have this kind of like expert prompt that is included here, and we have specific temperature. So let's talk about this one. There is one specific thing when it comes to work with DeepSeek. The first one is like it doesn't really support system prompts. So I've spent a lot of time building those 2D models and try different things. And providing a system prompt followed by user prompt often results in having the system prompt being ignored. So one practice is actually to have like this kind of like system prompt that is shared here between the two steps and incorporated as the first part of the actual prompt. Then the second thing to keep in mind is that DeepSeek temperature has to be between 0.5 and 0.8, 0.6 being the recommendation on the official repo. There is a 1 here because when using OpenAI R1, you have to set the temperature to 1. So this is the bit of specificities you have, when you're working with DeepSeek, but overall it looks like a pretty typical prompt. So we're going to get the result of this prompt. And here what we're going to do is that we're going to generate one campaign per language. So we're going to generate over the campaign. We're going to use what I've talked about in the introduction, which is step.ai.wrap here. So by using step.ai.wrap instead of step.run, ingest is going to be able to capture some asocial information when working with LLM calls, such as like the number of tokens in the input, output, the input and the output, to show them in the UI, which we're going to see right after. Also here, as you can see, we're going to generating an array of LLM calls, and then we're going to do a promise.all. And this is going to enable us very easily to parallelize the LLM calls. So here we are creating an array. We're going to have one LLM call for German, one for French, one for English UK. And then we're going to run them in parallel and wait for them to finish before returning the concept generated and the different localized campaign. So now that we saw that, we kind of saw everything when it comes to code, but let's take a closer look to this part. So the prompts, again, there is no system prompt. So we have to put the kind of like goal or definition of the agent here. Then we put like the result of the last initial prompt, which is a typical like prompt chaining pattern. And then here we can see that we have like some specific prompt instruction about like cultural nuances, local preferences being, for example, do people in the UK prefer to talk about things that brings value, and people, I don't know, in France, prefer to talk about things that are secure? This is what the model is going to try to evaluate. And then we're going to ask the model to generate a headline, main copy, call to action, kind of the basics of things that you need in marketing to actually start a campaign. So let's now run this specific example. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to grab a good prompt. Here I've already one ready, the one I just described. And I'm going to go in my ingest development server. So here you can see that I have the two projects that are ready. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke the workflow by providing the data. Okay, so I'm providing like a blurb that describes the mission of the company, ingest, the goal, and the different countries I'm targeting. Our workflow is now running, and you can see that the first step is that we have the key element and the core message, and we can see that the different localized campaign for each country are running in parallel. So let's take a look. Using step.ai from ingest gives us a lot of information about the LLM calls. We can get the number of token, duration, type of model being used. And we get a super nice visualization, from the input and the output. So here we can see the input, and we can see that the actual data are provided in the event are incorporated in the prompt. And here we can see the answer. So it's a DeepSeek model. It's a reasoning model. So we're going to have this think all the time before the actual answer. So here we can see it's thinking about a lot of things and the way it should reflect different things, different channels, and very like in-depth kind of like marketing strategy. Now, if we take a look at the different campaign, we're going to see that here, this is the campaign for Germany. So here, what's interesting is to look at the thinking and not necessarily the result. And the different things that we can see, like in Germany, I should consider the country context. German value efficiency, precision, and reliability to reflect those values. And then he's going to do the same thing, for each language. So I'm very curious about the French one because I'm French. And so let's take a look. So is this the French one? Yeah, this is the French market. So let's see what DeepSeek think about the French market. So here the interesting thing is like French business communication tends to be formal and very clarity. we're going to see some nuances in the way to pitch, to French people and to American people and German people, which is like a very interesting specificity of DeepSeek. What we're going to do now is trigger again this workflow using R1, and we're going to see how, it actually compares. So if I trigger again, but this time specifying another model, which is going to be R1 preview. The first step is done. Of course, the inference was quicker. It's running on a different infrastructure. And what's interesting for us is actually to look, at the actual, not reasoning, because we cannot have the reasoning of R1 here, but the actual result at the end, especially comparing the UK, which is going to be a good basis for us to compare UK instead of compare French to French. So let's take a look now at the UK campaign. So this is the UK campaign. Yes, England. So let's see what R1 says. So R1 is using like unleash your AI innovation without the backend hassle and just simplify your workflows as a headline. If we compare to what actually DeepSeek did, it's going to be interesting. Here's the reasoning of DeepSeek. It's interesting. It's talking about like covering different pain points and adapting to the culture. And we can see that what's being generated is a bit different from what OpenAI did. Overall, it's more formal. It's more like professional, while OpenAI R1 preview is generating something that is very American, very friendly, and this kind of thing. So this is interesting to play with. And I will encourage you to, to clone the project, to deploy the model, to use it. Like it's going to cost you like $2 for an hour of actual run, and to change the prompt and do some experimentation with it. Let's now switch to our second example, which is an agentic RAG that's going to help us to answer questions on the latest research paper on Active around LLM, but around anything that has been published. And for that, we're going to do some kind of like tool calling to get fresh data, and not only like data from the training of the model. And we're going to see it's pretty interesting to play with DeepSeek around that. This code looks familiar, right? This is again the ingest workflow that gets triggered by an event that has an ID and receive an optional model. This time, the only thing we're going to receive as a parameter for a workflow is going to be the input, which is the question we're going to ask to our assistant. We have our OpenAI client that enables us to use either R1 or DeepSeek, and we are already at the first step. So this time, we are not going to do prompt chaining. Instead, it's going to be kind of a hybrid approach between RAG and tool calling. And the first things to know with DeepSeek is that DeepSeek R1, as it is today, does not support tool calling. So you cannot provide tools. So in order to provide, DeepSeek with the data it needs to answer our question on fresh data, we have to be a bit smart and do a kind of like a RAG agentic approach. So the first step of our RAG is not going to be about retrieving data. We're going to ask to DeepSeek how it will proceed to actually get the data from the RAG's API. So the first prompt is very interesting because what we want is DeepSeek to return some kind of like structured data, but DeepSeek does not support structured or JSON responses or tooling. So I had to do a lot of iteration to make sure that DeepSeek actually replied this exact format that you can see sometimes with Anthropic using XML. So a few takeaways here. The first thing that was very interesting with DeepSeek is that it tends to really try to answer the question, like a bit like a chat-based thing. So I had to use this kind of like do not and uppercase stuff that you can sometimes see, if you're developing agent, to actually force him, to focus on the goal. Again, like with OpenAI and other models, you have to say which year is it, because otherwise when you say the latest, it's going to say, yeah, the latest are like from 2023. So here, those are like small but important line that if you remove them, basically, this prompt is going to try to reply to the user question in one shot. It's not going to try to search for papers. So this is the prompt. Then we have a step.run that allows us to execute some arbitrary code. And what we're going to do is actually extract the search query provided by the model and perform a search on the Axiv API. So you can see it's a pretty standard fetch. We do a fetch, and then we get all the entries and we format them, as JSON. The interesting bit that is kind of like not related to AI right now is the PDF download. So each result, as we saw, is coming with title, authors, summary, etc. But it does not come with the actual PDF, which is sometimes like dozens of pages of, the actual research content. So what we want to do to actually test, the capability of DeepSeek to ingest large context window and to resonate over it and to have different type of content in different languages and this kind of thing is actually to download the PDF. I won't go into the detail of the implementation, but I'm using this very good PDF reader library that allows you to actually to retrieve this kind of like PDF content in a very rich format. Here it's a pretty simple text format, but you can also try to generate like some kind of ASCII when you have like visual representation of the actual layout of the PDF, which can be something interesting to play with, while trying to feed the LLM with some context. So here we are basically extracting all the data and constructing a string with this kind of like structure. And now we do again a last step when we are providing DeepSeek with first the question, because as a reminder, there is no system and user prompt. So we have to kind of like be very careful on how we are building the prompt. And then passing the paper content we just fetched using the search query that it previously generated. And then DeepSeek is going to answer the initial question from the user using the papers that we fetched. So this is our workflow. This is pretty simple, but there was a lot of time spent actually fine-tuning the different prompts because DeepSeek is not there yet when it comes to compare it, to OpenAI R1 or Anthropic that have like a bit better understanding because of system and user prompts and also tool calling. So if we want to trigger, we can use, these prompts to ask questions about the latest advancement in deep learning and go to our ingest development server. So I can go there actually and trigger it like this. So my research assistant is now running, trying to answer the question of what are the latest advancements. So we can see that here the first call. So with ingest, you're going to get, the model that actually performed the calls, actual token use and everything. So this is DeepSeek. So DeepSeek is a reasoning model. It's always going to say, I'm thinking and describe everything. And then here we can scroll and see the actual search query, it generated. So here we can see actually generated this query. Then the generated search query is used, by the step.run to actually perform like a search on the API and download the PDF. So here we can see that we have the first title, summary, and then you have the content of the PDF. So here we have some like a formatting issue, but that's fine. The model can understand it. Finally, all those papers, are provided to the last step, which is going to do the actual answer. So here you can see the prompt on the left, which is called the input. And you're a helpful research analyst. You want to answer the question, what are the latest techniques in the deep learning? And here are the papers, what we found, and you get all the context. And here you get the answer from a question. I hope you enjoyed these two examples. The first one is a very good way to test the capabilities of DeepSeek R1 when it comes to multilingual and this kind of like style and tone adaptation that everybody's talking about. So again, every example that you find the links here can be cloned, run locally, and you can deploy the model with Koyeb in one click. Keep in mind that soon new models will be released in Koyeb, like the 70 billion parameter and also like new version of Qwen, including the one that has a 1 million token window. When it comes to ingest, we saw that the UI enabled us to get a very good visibility of what's happening, which is really useful when you're iterating and building RAGs, but also building agents. Yet talking about agents, if you're interested in this topic and you're building your own agent, AI agents, I will recommend you to look at our last library, agent kit that enables you to create agents that can have multi-agent collaboration, different level of autonomy, and search. Thank you again for watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe to be notified about next week's video.